A couple weeks ago, I did a video called I Didn't Use Reverb on Vocals for 10 Years. And that got me thinking that maybe I should do a video about using reverb on vocals. So here it is. Since I've gotten a lot of questions about the basics of sends and returns for effects, I cover that in this first section. If you already know all about that stuff, you can skip ahead about 3.5 minutes to the next section. Now, before I get into any details about using the reverbs and all that, I want to talk about some fundamental stuff. And I'm going to start with something I see a lot when people bring sessions in here, and that is somebody has added a reverb plugin to every single vocal track. It's not really a good way to do it. I rarely put reverb right on a track of almost anything that I work on, whether it's vocals or instruments. There's a bunch of reasons for that. The prime reason would be there's no reason to overtax your computer by having all these plugins that you're just kind of repeating over and over again. It just doesn't make any sense. The other reason is if you want to tweak out the kind of reverb sound that you have, you would have to go to each plugin on each track of each vocal and, tweak it and then copy that and go to the next track and do that. There's no reason to do that. And another reason is when you add a reverb, and you're going to probably add a stereo reverb, it's going to turn that vocal track into a stereo track. So if you want to do any panning on the vocals and automation on your panning, then you're going to have to automate 2 knobs here, and it's not a great way to do it. So I'm gonna show you a better way to do this where you're bussing all your vocals into the same reverb plugin so that all your vocals sound like they're in the same space. Check it out. Now, the first thing you want to do here is go to your vocal track, go to your buses, and select a send. Now, a few things about the sends. First off, as you can see, I have a custom name here. It says vocal verb. I did this by going to my in-out setups in Pro Tools, and you can see right here, instead of these being numbered, I have specific things that I named that I know I'm going to be using. Vocal master, echo, guitar, snare drum, echo, medium, whatever. You can name these things anything that you want, and it just makes it easier to find things and work. The second thing is you'll notice here that when I brought up my send, the fader here is automatically at 0. That's a preset in the preferences that I did. And I think it's really important to start with your sends kind of high. In the old days, it was all about gain structure and keeping noise down. Not so important today, but I will say some of these plugins have, these analog settings in them that will create extra noise, and some of them will create noise even when there's nothing going through it. It'll be sitting there and you'll hear a little in the background like, what is that? So you want to be hitting your plugins, your reverbs, your effects pretty hard, also so that they can push compressors or any distortion you might have on that track. Therefore, you can turn your return down lower, and it's just a much cleaner and efficient sound. The other thing is if you're working in Logic and you set up one of these sends like this, it's automatically going to create a return. But in Pro Tools, you actually got to do that yourself. So right here, I'm going to do a send to this vocal reverb. I'm going to set up a stereo auxiliary return. I'm going to call it verb voc. And then I've got to put the return input to vocal reverb, because what's happening here is the sound of the vocal, it's coming into your mixer, but this send is splitting the signal, taking some of that signal and shooting it out off here. You got to tell it where to go. So it's going to come back into the mix into this return right here. So I got to tell it to listen to its input is coming from this right here. I'm going to make sure it's on the same master fader here. Let's add a reverb to that. So now, if you want to put reverb on another vocal, all you got to do is just tell it to go to the same send. The song I'm using in this episode is called I Wanna Feel by Shawn Spencer. It's from his album called Empty Seas. I'll leave some links in the description. The first thing I'll do with the reverb is to filter it. Now, most people I know will put that filter before the reverb, kind of like this, right? But I gotta tell you, that's never really worked for me. I'm not really sure why. I think it might be because I will do other plugins and things after the reverb, which I'm going to show in a minute here, which I think maybe enhances the low end or does other things. And this is just the way I like to do it. Do it however you want, but filtering the reverb is a great idea. Now on this song, I wanted the vocals in the verses to be kind of drier and closer into the listener than in the choruses. But every time I tried to get the right length of reverb on it, I wanted it to kind of hold out but not muddy up the mix. I couldn't make it work. So what I ended up doing was combining a technique that I talk about in an earlier video where I talk about not using reverb for 10 years and only using delays. I'm kind of mixing the techniques here. Let me show you what it sounds like right here.
Can't get enough love.
So what I did was this. Let me solo it up for you. Here's the vocal dry.
I wanna know love. I wanna
Short
show
reverb.
love. Can't get enough love.
Then I added in this longer delay behind the
I
reverb.
wanna walk love. I'm gonna talk love. I need to know that love is for real.
And what that does, it kind of gives me the best of both worlds. It gives me this nice short reverb to give the vocals a more three-dimensional sound and some space, but I just barely sneak in that delay behind it, which is at 226 milliseconds on the left, 237 milliseconds on the right. That's just barely snuck in there, but it actually makes the reverb sound longer than it really is without that muddy tail that would be added on to the end. Now, another thing I like to do with reverbs is to, and I'm kind of letting a secret out here now, but that is to add distortion after the reverb plugin. I used to do that with this plugin here called Camel Crusher, but it quit working because when I try to activate it, it goes. But now I typically use the lo-fi setting or this devil lock, which is pretty cool, and I'll show you the difference in turning these off and on. Here is the verse with just the regular reverb on it. Now the lo-fi. Back off. Now double lock.
I'm gonna talk love. I need to know that
Back off.
love is for real.
That devil lock definitely is going to make it louder, so you have to compensate the volume. But adding distortion, I don't know, it just kind of gives it a cool sound. It kind of makes the reverb kind of bounce a little bit. I know sometimes people will put compressors after their reverb, and I've done that a couple times, never really made it work. But man, I tell you what, it's a great way to customize the sound. Always make sure that you have your filter after the distortion plugin. Now, one of the most important parameters in a reverb plugin that most people don't ever use and don't even know about is pre-delay. My hero, Alan Parsons, said in an interview once that pre-delay was the most important parameter he would tweak on reverbs. And if you don't know who he is, I'll put a link in the description so you can find out more about him. But let me demonstrate it to you right here. I'm going to actually use just a single word here, and I'm also going to use this reverb plugin because its pre-delay is really obvious. Here is the reverb with no pre-delay on it. And here it is with a lot of pre-delay on it. Now, what pre-delay is, it's the time between when the source signal starts and when you actually hear the reverb. And it actually is something that happens in nature. If you're like in a big church or an old fort or something like that and you clap your hands, you don't just instantly hear the reverb. There'll be a delay and then you hear the reverb. And the interesting thing is if you tweak it out, soloed up like this, yeah, you can hear the difference. Like here's 300 milliseconds of pre-delay. You know, here's none. But here's like 50. Here's none. You can hear a difference, but what's strange about this one is that when you actually play it in the mix, I hear the effects of the pre-delay more in the mix than when I'm soloing it. Check it out. I'm going to play it and see if you can tell the difference. I'm going to start with the pre-delay on 0.
I wanna feel.
You lengthen it.
I wanna feel.
Now, I don't know how much you could tell from there, but to me, when I lengthen the pre-delay, it seems to kind of push the reverb back and sometimes even make it feel like it's kind of sitting off to the left and right a little bit more, but it's a very important parameter. Now, in the old days, we didn't have plugins with built-in pre-delay settings on it. We were using, plate reverbs or spring reverbs or live echo chambers, which are just big rooms with a speaker in there and some microphones, and you'd run the sound in there. and we would want pre-delay. And how would we get that? Well, what we would do is actually add a delay before the reverb. I'll demonstrate this here. I'm going to use this little plate plugin by Sound Toys, and we would put a delay before it. So it'd be kind of like this. Let me make it 100%. So it'd sound like this.
I wanna feel.
And I can adjust the time. But the thing about using a delay that I really like is that I can use this mix setting here to decide how extreme this pre-delay sounds. Because that's the thing about a lot of the plugins I don't like, is that when you use the pre-delay and you lengthen it, you don't get any reverb, you know, until the pre-delay time. And that seems a little unnatural to me. But with this delay, I can kind of tweak it and do something really cool. So it'll be like,
I wanna feel.
Like no pre-delay.
I wanna feel love.
Here's some pre-delay.
I wanna feel.
You know, and then you can put it on the time.
I wanna feel love.
So if you put it in the mix, here's a no pre-delay.
I wanna feel. I wanna feel love.
Here's the pre-delay.
I wanna feel. I wanna feel love.
Just kind of does this thing to the vocal where it's the same sound, but there's this little thing at the end of it where it kind of does this little jump. Now, using a delay before the reverb is actually something I would more likely do with drums. Like back then, what we would do is we would have a reverb on the snare drum and then pick a delay that was in time with the snare drum, like an eighth note or whatever, and you kind of just use the mix knob and blend it in a little bit so the snare hits and you get your reverb, but there's this little part that bounces in time with the drums. And if you listen to older records, you actually hear this stuff a lot. It's such a great technique, but just another way to tweak out your reverb and get something a little bit more unique and customized. Now, this next thing isn't really about reverb on vocals so much. I'm going to bring it back around to reverb. It actually has to do with delay, but I'll get to the reverb thing in a minute. And that is, sometimes you want to have a single word delayed, so just one word repeats, like this.
I wanna feel.
So just that word feel is delaying. And you know, the way you could do that is usually I would just automate it. For instance, you know, you would boost the send to that long delay from the vocal. But sometimes, A, it's kind of a lot of work. B, it's hard to get it to just hit exactly the right way. So what I started doing was to make another track. I put a long delay on it for the time that I want, and I make it 100%. And then I'll put a unique filter on it. I like to filter all my different delays and reverb slightly different, but with these long delays, I'll filter them even more. And then whatever word I want to delay, I just drag it up to this other track here. So when it gets to that part,
I wanna feel.
And it's just a quick, easy way to get it done. But what's really cool about it is sometimes when you're trying to put a long delay on the vocal, but you hear it's actually not in time because the singer was maybe kind of in the pocket and a little behind and dragging a word out, or a little rush, and it sounded good with the singing, but not for the echo. So let's just say here on this verse, I want to put an echo on this one word here.
Can't get enough love. I wanna feel.
Okay, so I drag this down to this track here, and now we'll play it.
Can't get enough love. I wanna feel. I wanna walk.
It sounds a little late, so, you know, you would have to automate the delay with a shorter delay. It'd be a pain in the ass. But, you know, what I do is I just take this and I just move it up so it's actually on beat, because I'm only going to hear the delay from this track. So check this out.
Can't get enough love. I wanna feel. I wanna walk love.
Boom, now the delay is in time. But here's where it comes back to reverb. The real trick with this thing is to run that long delay back into your reverb. Because if you're not doing it, you know, it's going to be like this. It's going to sound like,
I wanna feel.
doesn't really sound like the rest of the track. So if you take on the long delay return, you feed that back into the reverb, it makes that delay blend in with everything else more, like this.
I wanna feel.
So it's common for me to take a long delay and feed a little bit of that delay into the vocal reverb. Now, earlier in this video, I was talking about trying to keep all the vocals in the same space, but sometimes that's not really the thing to do. So for instance, right here in this song, in the chorus, I've got these ooh type vocals going on that I kind of wanted to blend a little differently, kind of more with the music. So check it out, I'll play it for you.
I wanna feel.
So here they are. What I did on these was to actually run them into a completely different reverb. In this case, I used the altiverb, which is an impulse response reverb. Basically, you can sample spaces and also equipment. And in this case, I used a impulse response of a spring reverb. And I love spring reverbs for this sort of thing. They're very dark, and it's a completely different sound than the other reverbs that I'm using. And it allowed me to blend it a little better. And I also, of course, filtered it with this plugin. I got to filter out a little more low end. This plugin always seems to have more low end than I want from a reverb, but I just throw some filtering on it. But there's some legitimate cases to use a different reverb, especially in this bridge. These vocals are amazing right here. Now, I haven't really talked about types of reverbs, as in like plates versus hall versus room. And to be honest with you, I don't usually pay that much attention to it because one plugin's plate setting sounds completely different than something else. I just look for something that I like and I use that. But I will say that these impulse response reverbs, especially this altiverb, is quite amazing. As I explained before, it's a way to kind of sample rooms. And this is a little off subject here, but I'm going to dive into this anyway. You can create your own impulse responses. So for instance, here where I live at Moonshade Hollow, there's this house on our property, and the acoustics in there are pretty amazing. It's a small wooden room. Well, it's 22-foot ceilings, but it's a cabin. And I've done some recording in there, and I like this sound right here. It's a very tight sound.
I wanna think love. I wanna drink love.
I'll lengthen it some.
Hot in the night, love. I wanna feel. I wanna see love.
But what's cool about that is that I do a lot of filming and recording in this cabin because people want to do live videos there. I've done some interviews, and there's a couple times where somebody did an interview and then later on realized they had a line they needed to fix or a line they needed to add, and I could run some B-roll on top of it, but we weren't able to get back in there because I have some impulse response reverbs of that room. I can just run that vocal into this thing, and it blends pretty good. As another example is I worked on a movie, and I ended up doing some impulse responses of different places where scenes take place in the movie. And then later on, if we had to fix some lines, I could bring them in. But there was this one room there that wasn't even in the movie. It was actually where we all went to eat. And it had this weird sound, so I shot an impulse response, and it sounds like this.
I wanna think love. I wanna drink love. Hot in the night, love.
I mean, it's just this weird room, and it's actually very dark, but I've ended up using that. But once again, it's totally unique. Nobody else in the world has this reverb, and I like the idea of making things very unique, because the thing about plugins is that you can twist those knobs all you want, but everybody else can twist the same knobs. In the old days, you could go out and buy a EMT plate reverb, and then, somebody could buy the very next one off the line, but because this stuff is all mechanical and analog, they never sounded exactly the same. They might not sound the same day to day, depending on a lot of circumstances like the humidity and temperature and a million other things. I like the idea of things that are unique and one-time events, that in your song there's a bunch of little things that exist nowhere else in reality, in music and sound. And that's one of my goals and why I do some of these things. So now let's talk about automation. I actually do a lot of automation in my mixes in general, but definitely with effects. I'm going to give you a few examples here. So here on the verse, I had the vocals in the verse kind of dry, but I wanted this last word going into the chorus to kind of hold over this break a little bit. So I've got that second reverb on there, that spring reverb. It's only on the verse vocals on part of one word, and it's right here.
Know that love is for real. I wanna feel.
I boosted the lead vocal into that long spring reverb a little bit right there. I also, sent more of that long delay to it. But in addition to that, on the actual reverb plugin, I automated the low cut on it as well as the low gain. I'm actually pulling away. So when that reverb happens, it's actually slightly thinner.
Love is for real.
So yeah, I will automate frequency response on reverbs. I will automate the length and all sorts of things. Also here in the choruses, on these background vocals, I'm automating the send into this long reverb. I added some long reverb to the vocals in the chorus just to kind of wash them out a little bit. But on certain words, I wanted them to hold more. So let me just... And what's kind of cool is that, certain words have more delay, but I'm thinking I probably, I automated my feedback. So on certain words, that delay gets a little crazy, like here. So mess with the automation for your reverb, for the sends and for the returns, the amount of time. Also think about like in a quiet section of a song, sometimes it's kind of cool to pull the reverb back a little bit, make it a little quieter, or actually make it a little shorter, just to kind of give some more intimacy to the song. There's a million things you can do with automation. I feel like I'm just beginning to scratch the surface on some of this stuff, but this video is getting really long. So I'm going to do another one where I go over some of my other unusual techniques and also some stuff I used to do back in the day before computers. So stay tuned, remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.